In the space of less than 12 hours, an ordinary London townhouse becomes the most talked about, most notorious address in the capital. A place known by everyone from the humble chimney sweep to the governor of the Bank of England, from local fishmongers to the English aristocracy. But how? And more importantly, why? This is the incident at Berners Street, the biggest hoax in history. It all starts very early one morning in a quiet, respectable neighbourhood just north of Oxford Circus. Around 5 a.m, the door knocker sounds at 54 Berners Street, home to a Mrs. Tottenham. When the maid opens the door, she sees standing before her a chimney sweep armed with all the tools of his trade. Nothing unusual about that. He tells the maid he's come to sweep the chimneys, that he's been specially booked by the owner of the house to carry out the task that very morning. But the maid is confused by this. No such booking has been placed, she tells him. The chimneys have been newly swept just days ago. He must have gotten the wrong address. The sweep, disappointed at losing his first job of the day, goes on his way, and the maid shrugs and makes her way back to the kitchen. Just one of those things, she thinks. Nothing more than a mistake. Then the knocker sounds again, and when the maid answers, a puzzling sight confronts her. A different chimney sweep is there this time, hovering expectantly on the pavement. Just like the last, he tells her he's come to sweep the chimneys, and just like the last, he says he's been specifically booked by the owner of the house to do so. Before the maid has the chance to turn him away, she notices that he is not alone. Other chimney sweeps have now started to turn up, and as though recreating a scene from Mary Poppins, are forming a queue outside the house. As the next few minutes pass, a total of no less than 12 different chimney sweeps arrive at Berners Street. Moreover, they all have the same story to tell. They have been booked by the owner of the house to arrive at 5 a.m. that morning and sweep the chimneys. At length, the maid manages to turn the 12 chimney sweeps away, by which time Mrs. Tottenham herself is up, roused by the constant rapping of her door knocker. No sooner has the maid begun to explain to her mistress what all the commotion has been about, there is another, very different noise outside. A long line of coal wagons is rumbling its way along the cobblestones, one wagon after the other, each coming to a stop right outside the house. The drivers disembark, only to announce that they have arrived with a delivery for number 54. The maid and her mistress spend the next half an hour attempting to explain to each of these drivers that it was most definitely not them who placed the coal orders. Getting rid of the chimney sweeps was a doddle compared to this. The line of coal wagons along the street is now causing road traffic to back up in every direction. The carts and coach drivers who have been forced to a standstill are growing impatient, unable to understand why this usually quiet area of North London has, this particular morning, become so clogged with traffic. Needless to say, Mrs. Tottenham is very relieved when the coal wagons eventually leave Berners Street and all falls quiet again. She decides it is time for breakfast, thinks she might even pour herself a measure of something stronger than tea to have with her toast, given the inconvenience she's just had. But little does Mrs. Tottenham know that her troubles have only just begun. She has barely finished the last mouthful of her eggs and ham before the door knocker sounds again. Outside her front door this time is a succession of cake makers, all bearing huge, elaborately decorated 10-guinea wedding cakes. These cakes, they claim, have been ordered specially for delivery to number 54. The cake makers even passed Mrs. Tottenham their congratulations at the happy event. Mrs. Tottenham, however, is not amused. She is a widow, she tells the cake makers, and has no intention of remarrying. Furthermore, she goes on, since she hasn't ordered a single thing from them, she insists that they leave. Confused and annoyed that their wares have gone to waste, the cake makers depart, and the street once more falls temporarily quiet. But again, this is far from the end of Mrs. Tottenham's misery. The next set of people to arrive at number 54 Berners Street are the doctors, and they have come prepared, brandishing letters as proof that they have been summoned by the owner of the property. Hot on their heels come the apothecaries and then the surgeons. When they have gone, the lawyers arrive. Each of these professionals is increasingly vexed at Mrs. Tottenham for wasting their time. Many of them even begin to assume that the mistress of number 54 may not be sound of mind, that her widowhood has done unfortunate things to her sanity. It is not widowhood that has affected Mrs. Tottenham's composure, but the ridiculous events that have been unfolding on her doorstep, events that seem to be growing more ridiculous by the minute. The vicars and the priests are next to show up. Come, they inform the maid, to attend to a resident of number 54 who has been taken gravely ill. Behind them stands a sober line of undertakers, each with a bespoke coffin. More and more passers-by begin stopping to watch the farce play out. They wonder, given the number of vicars and undertakers and coffins outside, just how many people there might be lying dead inside number 54 Berners Street. By now, Mrs. Tottenham is utterly exasperated. She is quite well, she assures the vicars and the undertakers and the onlookers, as is everyone else inside her house. But when the hearses go to leave Berners Street, they find they are hemmed in by a total of 40 fishmongers, all bearing baskets brimming with cod heads, halibut, lobster and other salty delights. Behind the fishmongers come the bootmakers, behind them the dancing masters, behind them the shoemakers, and behind them the haberdashers, the hatters and the butcher's boys. If the coal wagons that showed up early that morning were enough to disrupt the North London traffic, the dozen wagons that arrive next bring the whole Berners Street area to a complete standstill. Carefully strapped to the rear of each of these wagons is a full-size piano, and the wagons and the pianos are in addition to the 6 stout men each bearing an organ, not an innuendo, plus the copious quantities of furniture arriving constantly by cart. The area is rammed with traffic, with carts and wagons, with bystanders, with horses and coaches, and with angry travellers demanding to know exactly what is causing the delay. And at the centre of it all, it is down to Mrs. Tottenham to turn all these people away, to apologise and to explain that it is not her fault, that she has no more idea what is happening than anyone else. But her protestations fall on deaf ears, and the hapless Mrs. Tottenham is left to bear the brunt of the abuse, the result of dozens and dozens of people having had their time wasted. And it wasn't just tradespeople that were affected by the disruption around Berners Street that day. Some of those caught up in the rumpus were distinguished, powerful individuals, known the length and breadth of the country. The Governor of the Bank of England, the Chairman of the East India Company, and the Duke of Gloucester were all stuck in coaches delayed by the traffic jam. By afternoon, the ongoing pandemonium around 54 Berners Street had even prompted the Lord Mayor of London himself to pay Mrs. Tottenham a visit. He turned up in person to try and ascertain just what had caused such an unprecedented amount of chaos in the capital. The huge crowds of tradespeople, traffic and spectators do not thin out until the evening, by which time Mrs. Tottenham and her servants have had the busiest, most bewildering and most annoying day of their lives. The street having finally fallen silent, Mrs. Tottenham collapses into a chair in her drawing room, trembling with upset and exhaustion. She has no idea what has just happened to her. She cannot fathom it at all. What she does not see are the 2 men, almost level with her, behind an upper-floor window in the house just across the street, grinning and shaking hands, their faces still bearing the creases of a whole day of laughter and hilarity at the events they've just witnessed. These 2 men are Westminster-born writer and architect Samuel Beazley and Oxford-educated man of letters Theodore Edward Hooke. They have spent the whole day in that room, the one with the best view of the street at the front of the house they have rented especially. They have been installed there at the window for the last 12 hours, watching the whole thing occur, whilst their servants fetch their food, refresh their glasses and empty their pots. Beazley now reaches across to pass something to Hooke. It is a guinea, the winnings of a bet they made not days before. Hooke had bet Beazley that in less than a week he could make any address in London the most talked about place in the city. And he had done just that, by placing a massive 4,000 orders or requests with tradesmen and professionals across the capital, informing them to come to 54 Berners Street that day. He had succeeded in bringing a large chunk of London to a complete standstill, ensuring that 54 Berners Street was not only an address people were talking about in the weeks and months that followed, but an address still being talked about centuries later. The Berners Street hoax has gone down in history as one of the most memorable and one of the most frustrating practical jokes of all time. Despite there being rumours shortly after the event that Huck was likely the one to blame for the whole pantomime, he was never taken to task for his actions. And the unlucky Mrs. Tottenham was never any the wiser as to what had caused the events of that bizarre and infuriating day in November 1809, when her house had become the most famous address in London. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and give it a thumbs up so that others can find it too. Links to all my social media accounts are in the description box below. Bye for now.